Good morning, first graders. Happy Wednesday, April 1st, 2020. It's April Fool's Day today, so maybe you can fool one of your family members later on during the day. Today is Wednesday, and before we left for spring break, we started to learn about retelling events in our story and learning about retelling the characters and the setting so far. Today we're going to focus more on the problem and the solution of our stories. So if you remember back before spring break, we looked at how the ending of our story, Iris and Walter and the field trip, and how that story ended. We read the last two chapters. So today we're not going to reread the story. We're going to just talk about the different parts of the story. So I want you to think back. I know it might be kind of hard, but think about who the characters are in the story. Remember, characters are who is in the story. Can you think of some of the characters that were in this story? That's right. Iris is in the story. Walter is in the story. We talked about how their teacher was in the story. We talked about how their classmates were in the story. We talked about how their family members were in the story. We talked about how all of the kiddos in their class were in the story, right? We talked about all of how those were the people, the who was in the story. The characters are who is in the story. And we learned about setting, and that was where the story takes place and when the story takes place. So in this book, Iris and Walter and the field trip, we learned that they were going on a field trip, right? Can you think back to some of the places in this story, the where were they in this story? Yep, you're right. They were in their classroom learning about the different animals. They were at their house telling their families how excited they were to be going on the field trip. Then they were actually at the field trip, and the field trip was what? Do you remember where they went? You're right, they went to the aquarium. So the aquarium is the main setting in this story. That's where the story mostly took place. Then there was a problem in this story, and the problem is what goes wrong. So I want you to think back to the chapter about where's Walter. Remember, they got to the field trip and they were looking at all of the fish, the sharks, and then they were looking at the coral reef. And Walter got so excited about being at the coral reef that the rest of the class decided to go on to look at the penguins. And then they realized, what did they realize? That Walter was missing. You're right, that's the problem, that Walter was missing in the story, that they kept on going in the aquarium and they realized that Walter was lost. Then finally, the solution is, how did that problem get solved? And usually that happens towards the end of the story, right? So we look back at how the end of the story ended and how did it get solved? What is the solution? Remember, the last chapter was called The Rescue, where they actually found Walter and he was still looking at the coral reef, right? And how they found him and they gave him a big hug and they were super excited that he was found. And then the class decides to go back to school because the field trip was over. So we talked a little bit about how when you retell a story, you want to make sure you're thinking about who is in the story for the characters, the setting, where and when the story takes place, the problem, what goes wrong, and the solution, how can the problem be solved? So today, when you're reading one of your own stories during your reading time, I want you to be thinking about if you can retell your story using these things. Okay, starting tomorrow and the rest of the week, we're going to be all done with the story Iris and the Walter and the field trip, and we're going to be using a new story to use and be using these things. So I want you to be trying this one on your own today with one of your own stories so that you're ready for when we do it with our new book soon. All right, guys, have a great Wednesday learning from home, and I'll see you tomorrow on Thursday. Bye.